Washington Congresswoman Jayapal is facing backlash over comments that she made about Hamas's alleged weaponization of sexual violence against women.
Other country.
I want to ask you about sexual violence. And it's kind of remarkable that this issue hasn't gotten enough attention globally. Widespread use of rape, brutal rape, sexual violence against Israeli women by Hamas. I've seen a lot of progressive women, generally speaking, they're quick to defend women's rights and speak out against using rape as a weapon of war, but downright silent on what we saw on October 7th and what might be happening inside Gaza right now to these hostages. Why is that?
I mean, I don't know that that's true. I think we always talk about the impact of war on women in particular. In fact, I remember 20 years ago, I did a petition around the war in Iraq.
Have you talked about it since October 7th?
Absolutely. And I've condemned what Hamas has done. I've condemned
specifically
all of
women?
the actions. Absolutely. The rape, of course. But I think we have to remember that Israel is a democracy. That is why they are a strong ally of ours. And if they do not comply with international humanitarian law, they are bringing themselves to a place that makes it much more difficult strategically for them to be able to build the kinds of allies, to keep public opinion with them. And frankly, morally, I think we cannot say that one war crime deserves another. That is not what international humanitarian law says.
Okay.
Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Christine Pelosi, wrote on X, "I should not have to say this in 2023. Here we are. Rape is rape. Do not minimize, excuse, balance, or both sides sexual assault. That is victim blaming. We have spent decades trying to undo it in the laws, the courts, and the hearts and minds of the people. Hashtag we said enough." Now, Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz added, "Hamas is terrorists, raped Israeli women and girls. The only balanced approach is to condemn sexual violence loudly, forcefully, and without exceptions. Outrageous for anyone to both sides sexual violence." English-language Israeli newspaper Haaretz has published testimony speaking to alleged sexual violence having taken place on October 7th. They say Hamas terrorists systemically carried out acts of rape, sexual abuse, and the world is ignoring it.
But some critics of how Israel has historically propelled unverified claims such as these in the past say the accounts of rape cannot be trusted. The Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal derided CNN's Jake Tapper, who shared a link to the Haaretz story on Twitter, writing, "Pro-Israel activist Jake Tapper must have missed the part where the interviewer asks the head of Israel's investigative committee for evidence backing up her claims of mass rape. And she says, 'Don't ask me what happened,' then refers him to unnamed Hamas Telegram groups." Bari Weiss also was the subject of Blumenthal's ire when she shared testimony from an October 7th witness who claims they saw an Israeli woman being gang raped and then murdered by 8 to 10 Hamas fighters. Blumenthal questioned the veracity of that account too, writing, "There is no mention of the source of this claim, Yoni Sadan, in any Hebrew or English media prior to December 3rd. Zero Yoni Sadan social media profiles are sharing this story, except to say they are not responsible for it. No individual Hamas rape story has been confirmed, yet we're supposed to believe 10 armed men raped a single woman in a chaotic scene, presumably with police and other gunmen firing around them. This is a fabrication designed to justify genocide and one likely inspired by other lurid fables." So even if you don't take the maximalist argument that Max Blumenthal is making there, it is true that what Dana Bash said in that clip, that there have been widespread documented evidence of mass rape, that has not been reported out at this time. Of course, anything could happen. But I think Max's point there is that the specific example that Bari Weiss was pointing to, there's no evidence of it or any mention of the people who are alleged to have been involved before this past weekend, and that despite there being ample opportunity, obviously Israel is a really sophisticated country. They've had now a month and a half to investigate, to go through the bodies, to look through the evidence, to do in-person testimonials, have not been able to come up with concrete examples. The Haaretz article that many people were screen grabbing and sharing around, it was paywalled, and I think initially also not in English, so many people didn't actually read the article. So the title of it was, "The Scope of Hamas's Campaign of Rape Against Israeli Women is Revealed, Testimony After Testimony." Once you're able to read the article, what's clear is that the article itself says, quote, "Thus far, the commission has not taken testimony directly, but will begin to do so soon." So maybe that testimony will reveal that atrocities took place, that rapes took place, but it does seem premature, and there was no pushback from a journalistic perspective on Dana Bash's characterization. It's also worth noting that journalist Owen Jones trended almost all of last week because he is one of the few, I think perhaps more left-leaning reporters that was given access to watch the now famous video that Israel has been inviting people to screen that is allegedly a depiction of a collection of all of the worst of the videos of the atrocities that happened on October 7th. And while Owens Jones says there were many, many atrocities that were horrifying to witness in that video, specifically, there was no proof of beheaded babies, no proof of Hamas killing children, no proof of, in the video, no proof of rape, and no proof of beheading humans alive. And for saying that, even as he said, he condemned the atrocities that were depicted in the video, for pointing out that there's no video evidence, despite what many other people were saying coming out of those screenings, of rape, got him pilloried as a journalist online for weeks. So I think we do have to be measured, especially in the wake of the beheaded baby story, measured about whether or not there were atrocities of this nature committed, or whether or not the specter of Hamas not just killing people, but acting with a kind of brutality that is different than what Israel is doing in terms of killing now, well over 10,000 people in the Gaza Strip, is being used to justify Israel's disproportionate response.
Right. What has been described in that video footage by Owen Jones and others, and what has been described by the forensic pathologists at the Tel Aviv Medicine Center that has processed the bodies, is people in mangled condition, in burned condition, people missing heads, perhaps because they were blown up or they in the course of dying. It's not right specifically that being beheaded was the method of death. They have found corpses that are missing their heads, that are in all manners of gruesomeness and death. So I agree with you that we should be careful about not exaggerating, and it's important to report the truth. And as far as I can tell, for the sexual violence reporting, I mean, there's a lot of allegations. There's people saying that they saw this, or that someone else told them they saw this, or that bodies were found in a condition that indicates this. You're right that that's the state of the evidence. The UN has said there should be further investigation.
There should be. And so much of that investigation is being blocked by Israel is the problem. So there was a story about all of the cars that had been incinerated on October 7th. Israel chose to bury them, literally bury them, which some people argued it's because Jewish funeral rites mean that they needed to be buried quickly, and it was difficult to, when you have burned, charred bodies in a car, that's what needed to be done to preserve those funeral rites. Other people said this is a clear evidence cover-up, because one of the arguments that's been made since October 7th is that despite the atrocities that were committed by Hamas on that day, the firepower that they were deploying was not the sort of which could have caused that kind of fire-related damage for the cars and some of the houses that similarly were charred to bits.
Remember, so what are you saying?
That the charring, that the burned bodies that were, again, a big part of the narrative that was coming immediately out of October 7th, were actually the result of friendly fire from IDF. And remember, they had to revise down the death toll from October 7th. Israel had to, in part because so many of the charred bodies that they were holding up as evidence of Hamas's brutality were, in fact, Hamas soldiers who had been charred by that exact Israeli weaponry that had the ability to do that. So the one other piece of this that I think is worth noting is that so many of the people who are critical of Pramila Jayapal seem not to acknowledge that, as we heard right there in that clip, she condemned sexual violence in no uncertain terms. But moreover, they went on to say things like, well, IDF soldiers, Israelis never commit these kind of rapes. This is not a both sides issue. And that is something, again, that the record really is clear on. It's just not true. So a report out on December 1st interviewed freed Palestinian prisoners that they said that they faced torture and rape in Israeli jails. Barak Abu Ramu said the situation in the prisons is devastating. The prisoners are abused. They're being constantly beaten. They're being sexually assaulted. They're being raped. I'm not exaggerating. The prisoners are being raped. If we believe that claims of Israeli victims should be investigated, the same should be true of these Palestinian
right, they should be investigated.
victims.
But right, you just dismissed those exact same sorts of claims from Israeli people.
I'm not claiming that the testimony of Barak Abu Ramut is true. I think it should be investigated. The people who are saying that there are that Hamas committed rapes, they're not even citing a witness. They're not even naming a witness for the crimes that they're alleging. And moreover, they're saying it is widespread without providing a scintilla of evidence. And moreover, outside of this initial, specific conflict, obviously, of October 7th and the events since October 7th, there are myriad other kinds of examples. In 2016, the Times of Israel reported the IDF removed a gag order on a 2016 conviction of an officer for raping Palestinian women. Another report, Israeli guards were shown to have raped Palestinian women. A Palestinian female freed from Israeli detention said more than 15 fellow Palestinian women were raped by Israeli interrogators to force them to confess to charges leveled against them and collaborate with Israeli intelligence. I already read the one from December, the reporting from December 1st, and people have been talking about how this kind of systemic violence against Palestinians has been ongoing, as in almost every instance of occupation and oppression that has existed in the history of humanity, sexual violence is a part of that. So to not only be making the argument that we should, of course, be horrified by sexual violence by Hamas, to then try to grandfather in a kind of whitewashing of the sexual violence that has been perpetrated by IDF soldiers and our own American military, anybody else in the world, and try to paint it as unique,
if we're just saying
does seem to be
rape is a tool of war. I mean, other Islamic ISIS and Al-Qaeda held hostages and were known to have engaged in rape during, we're just saying that's what terrorist groups do when they kidnap people.
No, that's what, I did not say that's what terrorist groups did, unless you want to call America and the IDF also terrorist groups, which a lot of people would.
Documented evidence of terrorist groups doing those kinds of things.
Of the IDF doing it, and there's documented evidence of our own.
I'm just saying the evidence of the same quality you're citing here this article might be, again, maybe these allegations are not correct, but these are witnesses of these things describing what happened.
I cited articles that were talked about people being convicted of rapes in a court of law. The very article that people are citing as evidence that there is now reported proof of Hamas rapes itself says we have not taken testimony. Again, I'll quote, thus far, the commission has not taken testimony directly, but will begin to do so soon. That contrasted with the headline of that article, which is the scope of Hamas's campaign of rape against Israeli women is revealed testimony after testimony.
What Max Blumenthal was responding to that Barry Weiss tweeted about is a eyewitness claiming he saw this sort of thing. That does not mean it's true definitively, but it is a named person making a claim. There's a number of named people in these articles saying we witnessed this or we processed the bodies and their conditions indicate this. Again, that doesn't make it true, but it is of a similar.
I have not seen that. Like, part of the real question here is why rape kits haven't been done. They've had now 7 weeks to. There was a whole media cycle about how apparently one of the, I don't know what you want to call it, services that's available to IDF soldiers is to have their ability to have children preserved if they die in battle because their gametes are collected on the battlefield after death. So you have that kind of a thing going on at the same time that you're not investigating really serious claims of mass rape, not even just incidental, like 1 or 2 times. But what is being argued here is that there is a, quote, campaign of rape against Israeli women. I don't want to mischaracterize what Dana Bash said, but she similarly used expansive language that's routine and a matter of course and part of a systematized rape. That is an allegation that is not aligned with the details that have been reported out or the proof that has been offered up by the IDF. I think most of us would be happy to see corroborated evidence. But in lieu of it, especially this far out, it is increasingly suspicious that we're being asked to believe the title of an article saying there's been a campaign of rape against Israeli women, at the same time that the article itself says we've literally not taken any testimony.
Yeah, in this article, it says Israeli police investigating sexual violence have collected thousands of statements and photographs and video clips, and that it is clear sexual crimes were part of the planning. And
I mean, the problem is, I'm sorry, the testimony issue is this. We've seen the IDF give testimony that Shireen Abu Akleh was shot by Palestinians.
What they say, then you're just going to reject what they say, and that's fine. But
no, I'm not rejecting what they say. I'm saying they have an obligation when making very serious allegations, when they're in the position of power and ability, given that they control the territory, they are one of the richest countries in the world, they're the ones that have medical tools at their disposal, they're the ones in possession of the bodies who can do these collections, that they have an obligation to substantiate what so far have been eyewitness accounts, and eyewitness accounts that aren't even from the victims coming forward and talking about what they personally have experienced. Well, here we are.
The victims are blown apart. They're charred remains, so they can't speak for themselves.
The image that accompanies the article that Bari Weiss was pointing to, and the images that were used to be the foundation of the rape claims initially in the wake of October 7th, were not of charred bodies. It was the young woman that was in the back of the truck. There's another image of a woman who has blood on the seat.
She was in fact killed.
She died later in the hospital, yes. There was a woman with blood on her seat, but you're arguing that it's charred remains. The implications seem to be that you cannot do a rape kit on those individuals. That's not true.
I don't know. I'm telling you I'm not saying that this has been substantiated, and I would be reticent to make these kinds of claims, mostly because the underlying gruesomeness of the death speaks for itself.
Well, I think that's a really good point.
We don't need
You don't
more.
need all of this. So why? And we've had this conversation before, Robbie. You know what my view as to why you would need to use hyperbole in a situation that was already sufficiently gruesome. And I think the reason is that if we're just talking about killing people is bad, you talked about headless Israelis. I've seen people dump a handful of pieces of Palestinian children onto a mat. There was a story. A part of why there people are concerned about the narratives here is that it was the Jerusalem Post that had to retract a story over the weekend where they claimed that a man walking around with his deceased, I think, grandchild, it was a baby, was lying and that it was a doll. They had to retract it because it wasn't a doll, because it's easy enough to prove when things are true that this is a real human child that was killed by Israeli forces. So all people are asking for, especially in the wake of the hyperbole that you're hearing from the statements by Dana Bash and the title of this article, is just a scintilla of evidence before we go around saying that it's not just that killing people is bad, it's bad when Hamas does it, and it's bad when the IDF does it, but that in particular, the IDF responding to Hamas killing 1,200 Israelis by killing upwards of 12,000 Palestinian civilians is appropriate because Hamas rapes and beheads 40 babies and all of these stories that have been unsubstantiated.
It's not appropriate. It's not retaliatory. I mean, it would not be appropriate if retaliatory. So if the argument is that it's retaliatory, that doesn't matter.
So why else?
It's appropriate because they were. The argument for why it's appropriate is to eliminate the terrorist group that perpetrated the attack. This is a conventional warfare between two states.
But you would be legitimate.
One has attacked the other, and now they're going to wipe out its government until they surrender. You would have legitimacy
in targeting Hamas based on the fact that Hamas killed over 1,000 people on October 7th.
Yes.
Regardless of any exaggerated and unproven claims of beheadings and rapes and the like.
I agree with you. Show the evidence if for whatever claims you are making and the underlying attack is brutal enough. So we will continue to report that story. More Rising right after this.